This is Wretched Radio with Todd Friel.
Story time here on Wretched Radio. This is going to be quite a journey. To Great Britain, to Bangkok, back to England we go. Richard Hoskins, he's an author, rather popular one, apparently, writing some books, specifically specializing in criminology books. And he's also a criminologist working with police, specializing in religious crimes. Going to scenes of crimes where religion was involved, not just Christian hate crime stuff or whatever you're perceiving, but if it's some sort of ritual crime, somebody murders somebody and religion is involved, he's the man. 2016, he flew to Bangkok so that he could do the final stages of what he believed was a transition from being a male to a female. And he is not a Christian, but he shares his story because he regrets doing all of that. And now he's trying to encourage anybody else who is struggling with those issues to rethink their mutilation of their own body. He's grateful he did not go all the way with the transition, but he went a long way, and it is a brutal process. He describes things in this article I had no idea. I think when you and I think about, okay, somebody goes under the knife to do that, it's all based on organs. Oh no, they do things to your face and to your forehead and to your hairline, and it's brutal. Thought this would be an interesting exploration of the mind of somebody who made that decision, so that you and I don't want to stereotype, but I think this man reveals something that really is the crux of the issue. And I think as believers we identify that, and therefore we know that we can help them with their struggles, because it has far less to do, so it seems, with feeling like you're in the wrong body, although that sensation, whatever that feels like, is there. There tends to be more to the story. I was not suffering from gender confusion at all, he writes. I had no need to transition. My reasons for wanting a new identity, I would eventually learn, were complex and had nothing to do with being male or female. What a bold confession from an unbelieving person who regrets his decision. In fact, I've come to believe that for many of the growing numbers of men, women, and most alarmingly children wishing to change sex, gender, reassignment is nothing more than escapism. It certainly was in my case. October 2009. He was a successful writer dealing with faith-based crimes, ritual murders, was an expert in the field. Successful. He wrote 2012's best-selling book, The Boy in the River, about the case of Adam, a victim of modern-day witchcraft found floating in the Thames River. But by October 2009, a cataclysmic event blew my world apart. My 19-year-old son, David, climbed 65 feet up an electricity pylon in Weston, Super Mare, and reached for a 33,000-volt cable. Witnesses reported a blue thunderbolt and hearing a buzzing noise. It should have killed him outright, but it didn't. From his hospital bed a few days later, he whispered, "It hurt me so much, Daddy." For 42 days, he held his son in a hospital bed. The sight and smell of my son's scorched flesh and then of rancid infection are now part of me forever. What is that? What is that? If you can't call that trauma, I don't know what you can. We tend to think war and post-traumatic stress, it finds itself manifesting in many different varieties and flavors, and this most certainly is one of them. I said goodbye to him the day before he died on December 4th, 2009. With hindsight, it's not surprising that I chose to leave Richard behind and instead become Rachel. Largely raised by women, I'd had a lifelong admiration for the fairer sex. I love women's wear, and this day, my closest friends acknowledge a sensitive side. Okay, so there's once again, desire for clothing seems to be a thread in here. Nevertheless, Marriage ended following David's death, and I found myself increasingly alone with my thoughts. In the months and years that followed, I turned to my feminine side. It had nothing to do with sex. I was never attracted to men, but it was something that I wanted quite powerfully all the same. What might it be like to put on makeup, to wear those clothes outside, to step into the ladies' bathrooms? I drove down to the local Tesco superstore and filled up a trolley with everything from ladies' briefs to frilly tops, jeans and mascara. It felt both scary and thrilling. Watching YouTube videos for makeup tutorials. I learned how to apply subtle tones, lines, hide the stubble. But I soon realized that if I really wanted to change my gender, then I had to go a whole lot deeper than just dressing up in women's clothing. In autumn 2014, I surfed the dark web, where you go to find stuff not thrown up by conventional search engines. I was in search of feminizing hormones, a dangerous step to take, yet one that proved disturbingly easy. So he orders some drugs from Bangkok. They cause him to be sick. I was informed that conventionally, someone wishing to change sex should wait 2 years before being prescribed life-changing hormones. It's not what happened to him. Normally, I would be required to, quote, live in a role first for 2 years. As soon as I discovered, however, the system bends over backwards for anyone who wants to transition, I was not so much fast-tracked as catapulted through the system. Within 6 weeks, I'd been interviewed by all required consultants, a process normally lasting more than 2 years. He takes bagged drugs from overseas, goes to the doctor. What's your issue? I'm taking these drugs. Oh, well, you should wait 2 years, but boom, we'll get her done in 6 weeks. My surgery took 9 hours when he flew to Bangkok to get it done. When the swelling disappeared, my face would be smaller than before, my forehead a couple of inches shorter and flatter, and my ears apparently smaller. The aftermath of the 9-hour operation was a blur of semi-consciousness, nausea, and pain. I was dimly aware of a nurse trying to wake me by shouting my name, Rachel. I threw up every time I awoke, and my temples felt as if someone had put them in a vise and tightened it another 50 turns. As my 15,000 pounds covered only a one-night stay, I was discharged and had to stagger into a taxi, still carrying my drip and the drainage catheters. My face was scarlet and had swollen to the size of a basketball. Midnight blue lips were draped across my mouth. When an NHS referral letter to the hospital landed on my doormat 3 months later in March of 2017 for me to undergo the surgery that we think about, I was pushed into thinking for myself. So instead of following the NHS, I took on a private consultation to think it through. I was diagnosed with suffering from, you guessed it, complex post-traumatic stress disorder from multiple severe traumas. I didn't have gender dysphoria or gender confusion as I had thought. I was trying to escape real, visceral, gut-wrenching pain. I had chosen profoundly the wrong way to fix it, and the NHS had been all too ready to help me on the way. What shocks me is that nobody looked deeply into my life story. No one at the gender clinics talked to me what had happened with my son David and about the 42 days I'd spent by his bedside watching him die from his burns. Nor did they bother to find out about the earlier traumas I had suffered. Sexual abuse. Working in the Congo as a young man, I had to bury my first children, twins who became sick and died. Then there were the hundreds of gruesome police cases I had advised on. Seeing that stuff will traumatize you. There was no shortage of clues for anyone who had bothered to look, and if it was true in my case, how many others are similarly misdiagnosed? How many adolescents desperately wishing to change sex are really trying to escape some other form of pain? How many kids are dragged with their distraught mothers to the gender reassignment clinic in London, but they're suffering from poor body image or from the Instagram era? What a transparent story that you typically don't hear about. How many of these individuals that are getting these surgeries, the hormones, are broken, traumatized, hurting people who do not need to go under the knife, but they need truth. They need a mechanism to help them think through things and to understand the awful things that have happened to them. In other words, they need the Bible. They need God. They need their thinking realigned with His thinking. That's what they need. They need salvation, and they need correct understanding and thinking about why the world operates the way that it does and the way that it's supposed to, the reason for it, and what Jesus has done to solve the problem. As we watch this continue to unfold in front of us and ask the question, well, what does it feel like to have the wrong gender? It's gender dysphoria. I think I agree with this author that the issue, it's sin, of course, because we live in a fallen world, and the only way to navigate your way through this curse is by having our minds transformed, renewed by the Word of God. Until tomorrow, go serve your King.